Started up the live stream. Genesis chapter 1. We're going back to the creation story. And it begins, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, again, I mentioned in the introduction before the live stream started that we are not going to break this down and cover every little aspect of it, but I do want to I guess, highlight this first phrase, in the beginning. In the beginning of what? I'm sorry? Time. Okay. Time is a fairly decent answer, although it looks forward a couple of days because time doesn't actually come into existence, and we're going to read when it does come into existence. But that's a good observation. In the beginning of... Is it the beginning of God? Okay, it's not the beginning of God. It does say I'm live. I think I must.
In the beginning, you're talking about in that phrase, in the beginning, God. That to me is in the beginning of His decision when He was going to put man on this earth. So He decided in the beginning to put a place.
Okay. In the beginning of creation. God didn't have a beginning. These immaterial things that are not associated with the universe don't have the limitations that that we associate with the earth. But material things and all things that we're going to be talking about in the verses after this have a start. There was a time when there was not man. That time existed. There was a time when there wasn't an earth. There was a time when there was not a universe. There wasn't stars. There wasn't light. There wasn't darkness. There wasn't life. There was something, but there wasn't anything in terms of what we relate to. And see, that's an important thing to consider and to think about. We make that, and by the way, that's not a bad answer, because that is the way that we think. There wasn't anything. Well, God existed, and His dwelling place existed, and things that we can't see or that we don't even know about exist. Angels. We do know that there's some kind of heavenly being called an angel. We know that. But there are other things that God hasn't seen fit to reveal to us. Because I don't know about it, does that mean it isn't real? Because I can't see it, does that mean it isn't real? And the answer is no. And we have to understand that from the beginning. That's where Deuteronomy 29:29 becomes really, really important. That says that the things that have not been revealed belong to God. But the things that have been revealed belong to us and to our children. And so, what God hasn't talked about isn't mine to speculate about or to build beliefs or doctrines about. What God has revealed to me, that's mine to understand and know. And so, this is the beginning of man, the material universe that man relates to. Our beginning, our collective beginning. It wasn't God's beginning, it's our collective beginning that we're talking about. In the beginning, God created. Now, there's a couple of things about that we need to notice. Do you realize that the Bible never does anything to prove God It's just an affirmative statement. God created. He is the source of all that we're going to talk about here. And so it presupposes His existence because we exist. And there is some arguments made about that later in the Bible.
You know, what you're touching on there, to me, it is so hard. To me, maybe not to y'all, but to me it is. Understanding is one thing. Comprehending is another thing. And then in front of, but believing is the important thing. And it's difficult when we try to consider and think about where did God come from? There's so much we don't know. What is time? Time is just for us. And then afterward, God has always been and always will be, and He promises us that we will be with Him. But we have been given so many blessings in this world that we tend to lose track of the fact that what coming in the hereafter is so much greater than what we have now, and try to understand all these things, but believing is the most important. You may not understand it, but believe it.
Right. What you made mention of where God comes from. Listen, that falls squarely in Deuteronomy 29:29. You know what God never reveals to us? Anything about Him other than the fact that He's infinite. What does that mean? Because He hasn't spoken to us specifically about that, tells me it doesn't matter to me. Because He has revealed unto us all things that pertain to life and godliness. That's what Peter argues later, right? So if He doesn't talk to us about it, it has nothing to do with us. But this does have something to do with us. He tells us about this. He wants us to know where we originated.
But you know, and also in Job is lamenting. He's thinking back, and he expresses all the greatness and the glory of God, and everything from light to thunder to everything he goes through, and we can see that in his words. But understanding how and where and when, it's just, to me, not
Right.
Can't comprehend, but believe it.
Yeah, exactly. And because He doesn't explain all of that, I can conclude based on what He has explained that that information is not necessary for me. That I can know about my life, and I can understand myself, and I can know about God, and I can know about my relation with God, separate and apart from understanding how, when, and where certain things happen that He hasn't seen fit to reveal. Here's fun. And this is going to open up somewhat of a can of worms, and if we get caught in it, well, then we will, but that's not my intention. This is a new debate. It's really not new. It's an old debate, but it's become a new debate again because the federal government that we exist and live under has recently released a report about the idea of life apart from the life that we know on the earth, in which their report comes to the conclusion essentially of it's possible, but we don't know. They don't deny the possibility of it. And there's a lot of people speculating about that. That's even crept into conversation among brethren. And even I got posed a question by a preacher that was this: would finding out that there is life somewhere else affect our faith and our understanding of God? It shouldn't. Because, number one, it has nothing to do with life or godliness. Else God would have told me about it. Number two, and by the way, my conclusion to him, my answer to him was the probability of us learning of life apart from ourselves is extremely low, because if our ability to bridge the distance in time that exists and bring these two separate creations together was there, we probably would have been given some information to prepare us for those events. And since we have no information about those things, It's not likely that we'll ever learn that there's life somewhere else.
Maybe he didn't want us to know.
But that's the point that I really want to get to. For those that are online and didn't hear, maybe he didn't want us to know. That's the point I want us to get to. Listen, because he hasn't said, this is all that I created anywhere, and this is the whole of every existence. He never says that. This is the universe as it pertains to what? To us. Is God limited to only creating one universe? No. God is unlimited. So, could he do it? The answer is yes. Did he do it? We have no idea. You know why? Because he hasn't revealed that, and we don't have the way to find it. And if he hasn't revealed it, it doesn't belong to us to find it. The secret things belong to God. But the things that have been revealed. We need to spend more time understanding what he has revealed and less time speculating about those things that he has not revealed. Where God has not spoken, we should not legislate. In fact, we should never legislate. Who holds the single prerogative of legislation? God. The only sense in which man can legislate is within the limitations of which he has given us authority. He's given us dominion over the earth. And we're going to see that in just a moment. And so we do have the right to legislate in how we're going to exercise that dominion and create restrictions and place restrictions upon ourselves. He's given authority in the home to parents. They have the right to legislate rules of the house that fall within the rules of God. He's given the right for nation states to exist, and so they have the right to legislate the rules of the nation state so long as they conform and fall within the rules that God has given. But we don't have the right to legislate universally. And that's why we recognize sovereignty, or we're supposed to recognize sovereignty of other nations and sovereignty of other homes and sovereignty of other congregations. I don't have the right to legislate what another body of Christians ought to do. That's another man's servant, not mine. And so this is laying the foundation for all of that truth. Yes, sir.
I like to think of it as a horizon. You know, you can only see so far. What's beyond it, you cannot see. And that's how I see Genesis. It's the horizon of human history. What God has been doing for eternity. It's beyond the horizon. And it's fascinating to think about. It's humble. It just humbles you when you think about it. But let me ask you this. I agree there are things in that category. But then there are things that you may put in the category of, well, what is the verse of? It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it's the glory of kings to, I think, search it out. And so there are things that God made fascinating in life that we get to go and discover.
Sure. I have no problem with searching and seeking to discover things so long as I do what? So long as I respect the limits that God has placed. You know, that's where it ends. We stop that search when we cross the line of the limits. One of the limits that God has placed, for instance, is the sacredness of human life. We might look at that one coming up soon. Notice all the things that we've looked at in this class happened in Genesis so far. Sacredness of human life is another one that comes in Genesis. But the sacredness, so I can explore and seek to know and understand the human body as long as my doing so doesn't what? Take a life that doesn't belong to me. I don't have the right to open Joshua up to find out how his body's working. Hey, I want to discover how the body works. God made the body, and He made us to want to inquire about these things, and so it's okay for me to just slit him open from stem to stern so that I can find out how his body's functioning. No, because there's also limits as to what behavior is acceptable and what behavior is not acceptable. And we have to figure out how to apply those limits as well. But yes, we do search things out. And He has set in the heart of man this desire to know and understand. Yes, sir.
And the imagination. But it has its limits as well. You have to have a good imagination to even try to comprehend this first verse.
Yep. I agree. Imagination is important, but it's only important in as much as we have to try to grasp things that extend beyond what can be known. What is God? But what does that mean? He's a spirit. God is spirit. What does that mean?
He dwells above the order of the flesh.
It means that He's not material. That's what it means. Because spirit is set apart as life separate from the material. But the only thing that I really understand is material. I mean, let's be honest. The only thing I really understand about myself is what I see in the mirror. And if I think of me, I think of my body. I don't think of me apart from my body. But the fact of the matter is, there is a part of me that is distinct from my body and that continues to exist even out of my body. And I only know that because of what's been revealed. And so we start seeing, by the way, we see a distinction right here in this chapter between the flesh and the person that animates that flesh in life. Right here in this chapter. So let's keep moving. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. What exactly was the earth like if it was without form? I don't know. What it means is it wasn't set in order yet. It wasn't placed in the condition which was necessary in order for it to do the thing that God was creating it to do. And by the way, this is an important thing. We know that God is not limited, right? He has the power to do anything that He wants to. I mean, come on, He spoke and there was light. He could have, in one moment, created the universe in perfect form, but He didn't. Why? That's an important question to ask yourself. Why does He create the way that He creates? And the fact that He tells us that He created, by the way, none of us were alive to see it, right? No man was alive to see the creation process, so the only way we know about creation is God told us. Why did He do it the way He did it? And why did He let us know that He did it that way? And by the way, there are limits to what He let us know. He didn't tell us the hows. He told us the whats and the whens, but very succinctly. And what we know is He formed the earth in its inception without form and void, useless for its purpose. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And so what we have here, at least as I understand this verse, is this useless physical mass that's covered in water, but God is present. The Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, the sun and the moon don't come till later. So light came into existence before the sun. That gives us some insight into the power of God, right? I mean, I think it's cool when I can walk into a building that has one of those motion sensors and turn the lights on in the room without actually doing anything. Watch this. I can turn the lights on. And they come on. Hey, I can turn them off. Or you get one of those cool light bulbs that you can control with Wi-Fi. Watch this. I can turn the lights on with my little phone. We think that's neat. You know what God said to make light? Let there be light. And without a source apart from Him, there was light. And so what this tells me is that God is the source of light. The sun isn't the source of light. God is the source of light. And then God created the sun to provide light on the earth. But the light itself originates with God, not with the creation. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night, and there was evening, and there was morning the first day. Now, this is somewhat accommodative because the heavenly bodies had not been created yet. They were created for signs and for seasons and for days and all of those things. We're going to find that out in just a moment. So when He says evening and morning the first day, that's a bit accommodative. He knows the people reading this are going to already be marking time by days, and so He explains that we have this period of a day. And who's the source of that period? God. So God's the source of light, and God's the source of time. He's the source of the earth. He's the source of light. He's the source of time. They don't exist because of the physical manifestations of them. They exist because of God. And they have physical manifestations because God wills it to be so. God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." Now listen, that is a terribly confusing verse if you just pull it out of its context and you don't give much thought to it. What in the world does that mean? Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. Huh? Well, what he's talking about is creating the atmosphere of the earth and separating and placing a canopy of water around the earth and the waters that were on the surface of the earth. Now, He hasn't made dry land yet, but He creates an expanse or space in between water, so we have an atmosphere. Now, the atmosphere is quite important for a lot of reasons, but substantially it's important for creating an environment in which humans in their physical form can exist. And so this process that's being described here, the creation of light and dark, the creation of marking periods, the existence of an atmosphere on this earth, these are all things that God is actively making happen for Himself. Because He needs something? No, for what? Now, we haven't been told yet for what, but there is an end in mind. He's working toward an end here. There is a process that is ongoing that He has begun, but He hasn't reached its purpose yet. What this is starting to do is lay the foundation for why there is an earth, why there is an atmosphere, why there is light, why there is dark, why there are days. He did this for a reason. We need to find out what that reason is. Yes, sir.
One thing that kind of come to mind is when Christ said, "I go to prepare a place for you," and knowing that Jesus is the Word, and you're saying, why is it laid out like this? I think there's probably a few reasons, but one is like the first thing we're introduced to is the power of God's Word.
Okay.
And by just God speaking and doing things, it is in the very beginning the power of God's Word, and we know that manifests as Christ too, and said, "I go prepare a place for you."
Okay, you bring up something great. We're jumping ahead a little bit, but hey, let's do this. This is going to be fun. First off, you mentioned that Christ is the Word. Yes, He is. There's a reason why John chapter 1 uses the Word was with God, the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. So that we associate the Christ, specifically in the person of Jesus, the one that was manifest in the flesh Himself and died on the cross for us, with creation and with the power of creation. There's number one, and he brings up the fact that Jesus at the end of the Gospel of John, toward the end of the Gospel of John, not at the end, but toward the end in chapter 14 says, I go and prepare a place for you, that where I am there you may be also. God, we're reading, is preparing a place for our bodies to live and function and exist. When Jesus says, I go and prepare a place for you, what was he talking about? A place for us to live and function and exist after time is over. He was going and making, by the way, he came in the flesh, he lived as a man, he died as a man, he was raised as we will be raised, he was changed as we will be changed. We're going to see him, for we will be like him, we're told in the Scriptures. All that was the first fruits. So he was the very first man to die, to be buried, and to be raised, never to die again, and to ascend into heaven. Him doing all that makes it possible for what to happen? For me to be buried, for me to be raised, for me to be changed, and for me to ascend into heaven in the presence of God. That's how he's preparing. He's preparing a place for me to exist post my existence on the earth. He did for me spiritually what God did for all mankind physically here. Prepared a place for them. Made it fit for them. Made it possible for them. Apart from God, nothing's possible. Now these are lessons that we're supposed to start taking from this early account of what's going on. God makes my life possible. Jesus makes my eternal life possible. God worked to make a place for me. Jesus worked to make a place for me. I have obligations. I have rules. I have limitations in the things that God did here. The same is true for the Lord's kingdom in eternity. So he goes on, he says, he made the expanse, verse 7, and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse, and it was so, and God called the expanse heaven. Now this is not the dwelling place of God heaven. This is the heavens of the earth where the birds fly. We call them what? The sky. There was evening and there was morning the second day. Could he have done more than make the sky? Yeah, the day before he made the whole earth. He made light and darkness. But he limited his work for a reason. He only did this, and he did it in pieces. So we need to start asking ourselves, what's going on here? Why is this happening in days? Verse 9, God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And so he creates land and sea. He is starting to make the earth a place where creatures can inhabit it that don't live in the sea. God called the dry land earth. The waters that were gathered together he called seas, and God saw that it was good. God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, which is in their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. He doesn't catalog every single plant that he creates. It's not the point. This is not a historical record of creation in the order in which everything was done, and this is... No, what is this? It's the book of beginnings. That's what Genesis means. Where did plants come from? From the power of God. How do they grow and subsist? By the power of God. And so later on, when Jesus compares us to a plant and says that we're supposed to yield fruit and do all these things, then we need to associate that with what? With God, the power of God, not ourselves. There's not a sun yet. So how do these plants grow? I went to earth science junior high, and they learned about photosynthesis, right? Where sunlight is absorbed by the plant's leaves, and the chloroform that's inside of the plant's leaf takes that energy and converts it into sugars and feeds the plant with it, and the plant can grow and bear fruit and do all the things. And you take the sun out of the picture, and what happens to plants? They die. But here there's no sun, and yet God causes plants to grow. And so, despite the fact that when we look at it through natural circumstances today, plants are dependent upon the sun for life, what we actually are learning here is that plants are dependent upon God for life. And in fact, we're going to find out in just a moment that the sun itself is dependent upon God for its existence and for the work that it provides and does. He's the one that set it to do the task that it does. And so all of this is showing us that the source of life and everything resides not with ourselves, not with the earth, not with the universe, but with God. God functions outside of the limits that we exist in. He functions outside of time, for instance. Does God die? Yeah, it's a loaded question, I know. Jesus came and died. But he couldn't die until he did what? Came and dwelt among us. Took on the form of a servant. And took on human life, which could then be subject to death. All of these things arise from God. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, trees bearing fruit, which is their seed according to his kind. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, a third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And so all of a sudden, in a moment, instead of there being one thing, the earth, there are now countless bodies in the heavens that are creating signs and saying, you see what I'm saying? God wasn't, he didn't expend all of his energy and have to stop on day one with the earth because that's as much as he could get done. He created all the rest of the heavenly bodies just as easily and quickly as he created the one. But what it does tell me is that the earth, for purposes of ourselves and our understanding that the earth is served by everything else in the universe. Those things exist because they're needed for the earth to fill its purpose and function, which we haven't got to yet. We don't know what the purpose of the earth is yet. He hasn't revealed that. We don't know yet why he's doing these things, only that he is. And so he's created all of these heavenly bodies, and he appoints two of them specifically. Verse 16, God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. Some translations say, and he made the stars also. I love that language. Almost like an afterthought. Oh, and he made the stars also. God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, a fourth day. Lord willing, next time we'll pick up there and talk about these things. But listen, this is important stuff that we need to know and grasp. Not the hows, but the whos and the whys. All right, what was that, verse 19?